report. We're joined today, right across the curriculum, or CAC, by our colleague in surveying, Nico Marina. This is Nico's first time speaking at CAC, and we've never had surveying presented here. So thank you very much for taking the time, Nico, to bring all the equipment and to prepare your remarks. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity. And we're going to start right away with our presentation about what people do not see behind land surveying. It's interesting. I just got this from Pinterest. There's a user named Liam, and there's a page that is actually for land surveying. And I found it very interesting. Usually when I say I'm a surveyor, instead of saying I'm a registered professional land surveyor or a professional surveyor, which are the titles that you see over here, they think, most of the people, that I ask questions, surveys. I fill out surveys. Very funny that our mothers may think we are scientists and up to Einstein level, and whenever we charge, people think, our clients, that we are just taking away their money. A question I always get: are you taking pictures? That's another one that comes really often. How we feel that we are pioneers and making history. And what we actually sometimes do, and you're going to see that there's plenty of other paths that we can follow, we're usually seen in construction, under the sun, without cover, in some tight places. Going to something that is more serious, what is land surveying based on the Texas Administrative Code? Based on the Occupation Code Title VI, which regulates engineering, architecture, land surveying, and related practices. Professional surveying means the practice of land, boundary, or property surveying, or other similar professional practices. This term, it includes, and I'm reading since it's a law, performing any service or work the adequate performance of which involves applying special knowledge of the principles of geodesy, mathematics, related applied and physical sciences, and relevant laws to the measurement of or location of sites, points, lines, angles, elevations, natural features, and existing man-made works in the air, on the Earth's surface, within underground workings, and on the beds of bodies of water, to determine areas and volumes for locating real property boundaries, platting and laying out land and subdivisions of land, preparing and perpetuating maps, record plats, field note records, easements, real property descriptions that represents those surveys, and also consulting, investigating, evaluating, analyzing, planning, providing an expert surveying opinion. Even giving an opinion is ruled and expressed over here. Or testimony, acquiring survey data, preparing technical reports, and mapping to the extent those acts are performed in connection with acts described by this subdivision. So as you can see, surveying encompasses almost anywhere and everywhere, either in the air, on land, or beneath, subsurface. Okay. I called it land surveying timeline. It would go longer this way. We're going to go in depth in each of these steps in history. We have the first one, which are called sometimes the first surveyors. Back in 1400 before Christ, the Egyptians rope stretchers. We're going to go in depth in the next slides. Eratosthenes, Okay. Heron and the Dioptera, back in 120 before Christ. The Romans, from 0 to 100, they had other equipment called Groma and Corobate. I'm sorry. And we're going to talk also a little bit about William the Conqueror. Going first with the rope stretchers, I found some interesting work done by Joel Paulson. It's called Surveying in Ancient Egypt, and it explains in part that these rope stretchers, whenever the boundaries were flooded and washed away, they came back and reestablished those fields. Okay, the land, the property was established. And something to point out, we can see a picture of the rope stretchers, and still these days, using this is a laser scanner. This is one of the latest equipments that we have. That technology has brought up. All in these days, we're still wondering how they got so precise and accurate with these pyramids. It's interesting, and something that it's pointed out, it's how their symmetry and proportion tells you how good of surveyors they were. Okay, they are even, I have heard, I cannot attest that they are aligned with stars also, which was really common for us surveyors to orient our works with either the true north or Polaris or bodies, celestial bodies. Later on, we go on to Eratosthenes. He's credited to be the first person that actually determined the size of the Earth. There's previous persons that understood that the Earth was rounded, and but nobody before him, up to my best knowledge, established the actual circumference of the Earth to be between 24,000 miles and 29,000 miles. How accurate he was, his error is between 5 and 20%. And we're talking about, he was back in 240 to 276 when he did that experiment. Okay, this was an article, it's called the APS News. Writer was Ernie Tretkov for the American Physical Society. Also, I saw on this article that it mentions that he hired he hired bematists, which were mainly professional surveyors, and they were trained to walk equal length steps. This is something I didn't know. I learned it to work this presentation, but we still train our students this kind of get their pace. They can that's one of the tools that they can have. Sometimes you don't need to be as accurate to parts of an inch. Sometimes it's more or less 2 or 3 feet, and this tool would help. So back then they existed already too. Heron of Alexandria, really interesting. Another thing I learned doing this presentation, he invented his own diopter. There were others before the one that he invented, okay? But mainly the others, they work either for horizontal measurements or vertical angle measurements. This one, he integrated both. And as you can see, we could be measuring angles in a horizontal manner, with this part over here, and also in a vertical manner, moving this piece of equipment there. If you take a look at this is something similar. This is what may be called a transit theodolite, depends who you talk to. Okay, in this case we had a cylindrical base. We had something to measure angles, and we had a water level. So over here, what is called a vernier, we have a way to measure vertical angles. Okay, we have over here a water level, and also it's missing this part, but it used to have horizontal plate that you could read horizontal angle measurements. It's really impressive that back in the date of 120 before Christ, he invented something that we still may be using, because this one, even though it's electronic, it also measures horizontal, vertical angles, and it still has a bubble for leveling purposes. The Romans. There was a lot of information I found for them, and actually there are too many studies or papers about what they did in surveying. I'm only going to get a couple of these of their equipments. This was called the groma. This was meant, they used the base point, which is where we get this aligned to, and then we could build. They started to do grids with this, and it was perpendicular, everything. It was used in the war, it was used for buildings. It was really interesting. This is called a corobate. I may not be pronouncing it the correct way, but this was meant as a level for elevations and slopes measurement. They are also credited with, some people, some of the work I read said that they use what is called a chain. Okay, and it even credits them with the invention of it. That may be something to dispute or have a discussion about. From that, in surveying in United States, usually you're going to hear what is called the Gunton chain, which is an example of what we see over here. From that, the evolution would be the steel tape that we use, that is graduated, usually 100 feet long and with parts of a feet and tenths of it. William the Conqueror, next in our timeline. He has he requested a survey, okay, about properties. It's called the Domesday. It's really interesting. That would be that's going to come into the next part of our presentation, where we talk about how it has evolved. Though he wanted to know who owned which property, who lived there, how much the land was worth, and how much tax he could charge. Thus, this could be compared to a census, okay, in our days. And also later on we're going to learn about a cadastre, okay, which is a map of the properties, mainly for taxes. Some of the questions included, as I said, who owned it, how many lived there, production or cows that were there. And they had a timeline that they asked to update their records. This is a picture surveyors, we as surveyors use a lot. Sometimes they name it 3 surveyors and another guy, okay? And I put it as famous land surveyors, not to be into that discussion. Well, one of them was actually George Washington. He was appointed as the Surveyor General in Virginia back in 1749. Okay? And also he, based on the information I found on point-to-point survey, he was also the first registered county surveyor in the United States. Okay. Another one in that famous Mount Rushmore is Abraham Lincoln. He was a surveyor too, before being a president. Briefly, it says from what I read that he was really young, and then he was elected to the Illinois legislature. The other one is Jefferson. It's Jefferson. He was appointed county surveyor in 1773, and then he asked for Lewis and Clark, for the famous Lewis and Clark expedition related to the Louisiana Purchase, to do that exploration from 1804 to 1806. And it's said that they were really accurate in what they did up to the time period that they have. And there's even what is called an ellipsoid that is named Clark. The Clark ellipsoid. It was used as a base for coordinates too. And that leads to the other famous land surveyors. As I mentioned, we had Lewis and Clark. Another one that you may have heard too, it's Mason and Dixon. Okay, they were establishing some of the comments that we're going to hear. Established that it was trying to divide the North from the South, but it was more to solve a boundary dispute. They had to run this line. Here we have some evolution. This is Jeff Ryle gave us this slide, thanks to him, from Leica, and it shows some of the equipment back from 1921 up to these days. This is more or less what we have over here with it was called a T2 again. This is from the brand Leica. Then we started using what is called an electronic distance meter. This and this, where you had to put it on top of it, so it sent beams to then measure, capture back, and then based on the time travel, then you can tell how far it was. And then we go up to the integration of those inside of the equipment. That's what's called nowadays total stations. This would be for the GPS. I didn't get to work with this. I was 7 years old back in 1984. But we have one of these equipments. Actually, it was really heavy. It's like this big. And from that, the evolution of the GPS going up to instead of having all this equipment, now you can have it in a rod. Sometimes you have it on your cell phone. Some of them have certainly some of those capabilities. That's back in 2004, and from that we come to this integrated system that would have the GPS on top and the total station over here for the measurements. And some of these, they have scanning capabilities. They can be scanning places. This would be a laser scanner, and this seems like a picture, but it's actually a scan. And this is what is called a point cloud. Okay, so it would be taking each of these pixels, let's say, is an actual measurement with distance, angles, coordinates, and so on. I would like to show you something that it's really interesting. It's happening. Technology has made surveying, sometimes it's called geomatics. We have a lot of disciplines being overlapping or working together in the same environment. This is from a student I met at SAGES Convention Society, Surveying and Geomatics Educators Society, up in Oregon this year. And he shared with me this, and I would like you to see this too. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Let me check this. Geomap or LiDAR views. We'll have to get out, see if it works over here. Well, explaining it, if it doesn't work, we had previously, well, it seems like it's not going to work. I'm sorry. So previously in surveying, we used what is called photogrammetry. This is a concept similar. We get pictures, and based on some overlap for the pictures, in the pictures we can go ahead and build 3D models. Before we had stereoscopic views, we had to use some special stereoscopes actually to see aerial pictures in three-dimensional ways, and it was really interesting. It's really sad that we're not able to see it now. Okay, but later on. I would like to talk about also some of the applications that you see today in land surveying. We have hydrographic surveying. That's usually when we map the bottom of either the sea, a water body, or anything that's underneath water. We map it. We may be scanning it, or we may be actually inside the water making the measurements. And that is used shipping industry, cruises, whoever is navigating in the sea may use what is called the nautical charts. That's made by us too. Some other uses are for exploration, dredging, marine construction, oil exploration, and drilling industries. Another application I was talking about previously that is called photogrammetry. It is based on aerial pictures to build photogrammetric maps. As I was explaining, usually we get an overlap of pictures. Okay, we have a flight plan, And we have some ground controls, so we can give coordinates to those maps and make them useful. And with the overlaps, we can build 3D models. And what would be the purpose of that? For construction, development, and so on. Construction, where is usually where we are seeing in the side of the road, okay? It's really common. It's, I would say, almost never ending. As you can see, we may be in the highway. We may be, actually this may be archaeological work over here happening, but it may be related with construction too, as sometimes, usually we go before, in construction we go before anything goes to make the, what is called either a topographic map, so then the designer can go ahead and design, of course, do his job, and then we stay in control of the projects, so everything is put in place in the place it's meant to be at.
I have a question about the picture in the lower right there, on the right. Are they typically in teams of 3? And if so, what is each of them doing?
Well, yes. Right now it has changed, thanks to technology and thanks to pieces of equipment like this. It has changed. Back then it was like this. It is, to me, it would be best practice to have 2 or 3 persons. Well, this is what we call a rodman, okay? A rodman, yep. His function is to pay attention that this is, in this case, this is a straight. He's looking for a steady place to put the rod, so we get the elevation transfer from this, from another place that maybe, let's think this is a brass plate over here, and they used it as a reference point. This would be the node keeper, okay? Now that it has changed to a data collector. This is where most of the things are written now. Even notes, you can write notes over here and take pictures. Yeah, it's wireless. It connects via Bluetooth to this, usually to avoid transcription errors, because when you do it this way, until you get to the office or until you stop working and you start doing the computations, then you realize, oh, there was a problem. And then you have to either go back to the field. If it's over the error that was allowed, you should go back to the field instead of just adjusting it and making it perfect.
Can all 3 of them do all the jobs?
No, usually not. This requires some skills. This requires other skills, the node keeper. And then you have the instrument man, which would be the one that knows the equipment, has more knowledge of what it's needed. Because after these 3, there's someone that's sometimes called a party chief, has maybe some 5-10 years of experience working, knows more of what the one in the office, which may be the RPLS, is requesting. That other person that is not in the picture, or maybe him, because sometimes they are supervising what the others are doing. That person will understand what's needed from the draft man, because this is a work that is going to be used by engineers, architects, lawyers. This is a leveling loop, but whenever we have properties, it's going to go to a lawyer at some point.
Now, when they're checking boundaries or whatever they're working on, how do they know they've got it right? What are they checking it against?
Well, the best practice when your boundary, we haven't get to boundary surveying, but now that the question pops, you try to survey and get all the data that you can get from the adjoiners. That is why we are licensed, because we can disrupt an entire neighborhood, and it can cost lives. And if there is oil and gas and mineral rights, it goes worse. But that's one of the ways. Okay, a good practice would be to gather information of the adjoiners.
What are those? Adjoiners?
Yeah, this may be my main property over here. Adjoiners would be all the tables around, all the properties that are touched by my client's lot. That would be a good practice. There's a discussion that goes because of we have this super accurate equipment. I can measure less than a millimeter, let's say. Just putting up some number there. It's not about that. It comes down to a decision based on descriptions, based on evidence. And then afterwards, we do not make the decision of where the boundary goes. Actually, it goes to the courtroom. We gather the information, and we put in a plat what we found. Okay, if there is a boundary dispute, which happens, usually it's avoided. It's recommended that the parts agree. As professionals, sometimes we try to get them to agree, but worst case scenario, they will end in court, and sometimes the court will look for expert witness, will either rely on the testimony of one surveyor or will bring an external surveyor to the case, and then both parties are going to get a surveyor and bring evidence in. But the court is the one in charge to say, though, this is going to be the line, and then we establish the line based on the instructions from the court.
May I comment? I know you're still presenting, sorry.
No problem. Go ahead.
It's interesting, Ron's question, because we have property that's out of town, and we have a house on this property, and over the years, somebody bought a third of a lot, and then they built a garage, and it's on this part of the third of the lot that used to belong to this other person. There's also Army Corps of Engineers markers, but you have to know where they are. Like, we know where they are because we've actually gone and cleared the grass and cleared the ground, but over a certain amount of time, those things will just get covered up by grass and ground, and you won't be able to find them for surveying purposes, right? But we had the same thing happen. We had our property here, and we had another property here. And then there was property here, and you could squeeze a house on it, but we didn't want somebody to put like a camper trailer there and call it, that kind of thing. So we bought this property together, and then we had the plans, and it went to the court, it was filed. But what happened was there was somebody who, and I don't think it was the surveyors, I think it was somebody else actually. They put one of these little, plastic red ties on a post, and it was actually on our property, and they took off trees from our property. They cut down 2 trees that ultimately were on our property. And it was amicable, but we went over and we said, those 2 trees you took out, they were actually on our half of them. So I'm just saying, I can see how looking at the adjoining, where was their house, where was our house, and it was literally a difference of about 20 feet. And they took out 2 trees that were.
No, and actually, really interesting cases come from this. There's Texas versus Oklahoma, about the Red River, I believe, would be it. It's about boundaries. I wanted to discuss boundary as the last, but yeah, the last slide, because, and I'm gonna talk about it then, but a question arises. So there are many cases that actually our students have to read because they establish how to do certain things. There's something called dignity of calls, or what monument are you going to honor? Which goes first? Natural monuments or man-made monuments, or things like that. We as surveyors, whenever we're doing boundary surveys, we have to honor that, what is called the dignity of calls, and so on. Something also that we deal with is geodesy, okay? And I answered your question, and we're going to go back to that in a few slides too. This picture is not actually how the network is established, but gives you an idea of triangles on top of the world. We use what was called triangulation to measure from around different parts of the world, actually. Triangulation was used worldwide. Sometimes another way was trilateration and things like that. Methods like those. Before we had man-made satellites, because there's something that we also, I was talking about, we used Polaris, we used the moon to reference our works. After the advent of the satellites, or man-made satellites, then we are combined with observations from different places in the world, and the satellites up there for the geodetic coordinate system. Sometimes this geodesy, now modern geodesy, is called satellite geodesy. This deals mainly with the shape of the Earth and the dimensions, how it's either shrinking here or there, and even how gravity has an impact on the satellites has to be worked, so we know how our coordinates are going to change and how to update the network. Another interesting thing that some surveyors, or at least surveying equipment, has been used for is, depending on the problem or the situation, they may call an expert, an RPLS or a professional surveyor, to make measurements in a traffic accident scene or crime scene. This is called forensic surveying. Now, I have seen mostly policemen using equipment in some sites. This is a scanning of the truck. Based on this, on the deformation of the element, you can tell where was impacted. There's a software for these purposes. Where was the impact? Maybe the speed based on the skid marks, the position of the cars, how may have happened. And that's where surveying comes in, to give a better picture to the courtroom of what may have happened in the place. This is where I wanted to stop with a little bit with boundary surveying. And when I was talking about the cadaster, you remember we talked about William the Conqueror, okay? On the Domesday, it may have been the basis for this kind of map. A cadaster is meant for taxes, ownership, and things like that. Something I came across, and I changed a little bit the presentation. I received from a colleague an article from a surveyor in Arizona. So let me see if I find his name over here when I say it correctly. Dan Muth in Arizona, and it changed my point of view a little bit, or just gave me a wake-up call. We have been talking about how equipment has evolved, and these new technologies, drones, laser scanners, or robotic stations. But his point of view was really interesting, and that's why I got boundary, and actually your questions came about this. Surveying is really important because of stewardship, what we have, how do we manage our resources. When we talk about resources, we would like precisions perfect. We wouldn't want things to be more or less 3 or 5 or 10 feet. No, I need to know where actually ends my property. Okay? And that would be a good way to present the importance of boundary, of surveying related to boundary, and that is why we're also required to be licensed, because we will have to make decisions, and we need some specialized knowledge to apply to then maybe establish property lines. As I said, we can disrupt the neighborhood. We can tell a person and I'm not going to judge another colleague, but they may tell them, that's your corner, that's your line, that's the other corner, and that may end in a fatality because they believe that's their property. That's why we have to be very cautious. And as I mentioned, he wrote an article in LinkedIn and was explaining this, that we may have been too into this new technology and may have forgot a bit about ownership, which is really important when we start talking about resources. And there's a problem. Some of the states, they have water problems. Guess what? If they don't know their boundary, they won't know ever like what we have. And that's where I wanted to get to with boundary. Do you still have questions about boundary in go. Okay.
So what about some of the islands that the Chinese are making? They're taking land.
That goes international.
And they're making these islands. And how does that affect your discipline?
Well, first, I don't know that. I know what's happening. I know that there's an airport made, actually. It was, really enjoyed that, being a construction surveyor. But talking about boundaries, there are international boundary lines. It's their property. It depends on the rules and the laws of each country. Okay? There are countries, there are states that you never own water.